Hey friends, it's Wayne Polson, and today is, guess what? T-minus 10 days and counting until the big reveal. Can't wait to tell you guys all about it. Can't tell you now. A lot of you are guessing, and that's okay, you can guess. It's a lot of fun to guess, isn't it? Who was it, Ironman Workman, that suggested maybe I was getting a chipper on the April 2nd day? Could be. It's a likely possibility. Can't tell you though. So we'll see. We'll just let it happen, won't we, folks? Hey, listen, today I'm going to do part 2 of what I began on the T-minus 11 day yesterday. Yesterday, if you didn't know, I replaced the power inlet module on my '07 Thor Hurricane RV. It's a Class A RV. It's a 30 amp shore power inlet. Got that done yesterday. That was part 1. Today we're going to do part 2. Part 2, I'm going to replace the cord cap or the 30 amp receptacle on the end of the shore power cable. So with no further ado, let's get to it. All right, so here we are, folks. This is my shore power cable. I've already lopped off the end of it here. I wanted to make sure that I was going to be working with nice shiny copper, so this has been flush cut here. Now the manufacturer of the new cord end, which is what I'm holding right here, this is the new 30 amp receptacle that I'm going to be putting on the end of this, recommends cutting this cable to a specific length. Now before we can, or I don't mean the cable, but the insulation. But before I cut the insulation, one of the things we have to do is we have to put this weather-tight boot over the cable before we do anything. I normally use a dab of Dawn dishwashing liquid or some kind of soap, some kind of liquid soap, and just spread that inside there like that. It just sort of makes it easier to put these pieces together. I'm just going to slide that off screen here so it's in place when we get ready to assemble the whole thing. The manufacturer recommends cutting this outer jacket to 1.25 inches. But now if you remember what I was talking about yesterday in my video with the camper, so I always like to leave a little bit of an extension on the green safety wire, the ground safety. So I'm going to go 1 3/4 inches instead of 1.25 inches to give myself about a 1/2 inch more length there. So I'm going to go right about here, just to have a mark there. I don't know if you can see that mark, but it's enough for me to see it. And here's an interesting thing. I don't know if you people have ever done this, but I found that I can use a pipe cutter. This is a copper tubing cutter to actually cut this outer jacket. So I'm going to open it up and put the cutting wheel. Now you got to have a sharp cutting wheel to do this. You don't want to do this with one that's been used a lot on copper pipe. You can take these wheels off and replace them. In this case, I took this wheel off and actually sharpened it. So this is a handy way though to cut through this cabling, and I've got it too tight. What will happen as you start to work your way through this, eventually there's a green paper coating around the wire bundle that's just below this black insulation. It'll start to poke its little head through there. You'll start to see it reveal itself. And you can sort of see it coming through there now. So now I just want to give it a couple more turns, but not much more, because I don't want to cut through that material. We're going to call that good. And as you can see here, it's pretty well cut through. Now areas where it doesn't cut through, you can just tap that with a sharp razor knife like that, and it'll snap. Here's another space right here. Okay, so that whole thing is separated now. So we'll pull this off. So there you go. This is the paper jacket on the outside of that. I'm going to grab a pair of scissors here and just cut that off. You could use a razor knife as well. As long as you're careful with your knife, don't cut your fingers, folks. So I'll use the razor knife for the rest of this. I'm just going to get all of that stuff off of there so that I don't have to worry about it. And always cut away from these wires here, folks, because you don't want to put a nick in this insulation. This is why I like using the pipe cutter, because it will not cut through these insulation layers here unless, of course, you keep cranking and cranking and cranking with it. You got to know when to stop, and that's why I said stop when you start to see the green paper being exposed through the cut. All right, so now keep in mind this is a 1/2 inch longer than what the manufacturer recommended. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to cut a 1/2 inch off of the black and the white wires. So now normally I eyeball this, but I just want you to see what's going on here. So I'm going to go ahead and just mark this at a 1/2 inch. Okay, so grab my cutters here. I'm going to cut them both off at that mark. So I should still have 1 1/4 inches. Okay. All right, so now I have a pair of wire strippers. These are just very inexpensive wire strippers you can get anywhere. All right, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to strip this back. Now the manufacturer recommends on this to have about 5/8 of an inch stripped back. So we're going to go back 5/8. Let me go ahead and just put a measurement on that for you. So 5/8 puts us right about there on the black and the green. Or I'm sorry, the black and the white. And then for the green, right about there. All right, so let's go ahead and strip these. We'll do this one first. Again, don't clamp down too tight on these, just tight enough to pierce the jacket. You don't want to damage the strands of individual strands of copper on this. You want to be very careful not to do that. At some point you can just pull that off. Notice there's no copper left inside of this jacket, and they all look like they're in good shape here. I'm going to give these a twist. Now there's also a misconception out there that you should tin these with solder before you put them in the connector. That is really not a good idea, especially in areas where the climate changes drastically from cold to hot, because the solder will actually compress under the screw, and what will happen is when it compresses, when you tighten this in initially, it will be tight, but once there is a hot spell and a cold spell, especially when the cold spell takes place, this copper will shrink, and the solder will also shrink, and you'll get a resistive connection under the screw head, and that will cause heat buildup and potentially melt your connector and maybe even cause a fire. So don't solder these terminals. It seems like a intuitive thing to do. Don't do it. All right, let's get this. There we go. And then finally the black, we're going to do it the same way. Let me put a little mark there that I can see. Again, marking these things, it's probably good to do this if you've never done it before, to go ahead and mark them, because it keeps everything uniform. So there we go. Okay, so all of these are now stripped to length. My ground is longer, like I wanted it to be. And so now we have the next phase. And actually, I should have done this in a different order as well. Normally, too, folks, I would take this cap off to begin with. We're going to pull the end of this cap off. And I would have slipped this over over the wires as well. I wasn't thinking. So the problem with doing this when you're at this stage is that you take the risk of these pieces right here getting stuck and hung up in here. So I'm just going to be real careful with it. Okay, now there is a rubber seal in here. So if you want to, you can take another dab of the Dawn liquid. But what I'm going to do instead of putting it on the seal, I'm going to put it on this part of the cable because I don't want this Dawn liquid to get on the copper. Okay, so I'm going to get my copper through there. I'm going to push this over. And now that slides on real nice, but you see what happens, folks? This is what happens when you get things a little bit out of order. So I want to make sure that I don't miss any strands. All these strands have to go under the screw. You don't want any strands that are stray. It's very important. So dress these up real nice, just like that. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to get ready for insertion. So I'm going to spread these apart a little bit so that they're ready to go into the proper screw hole on the back of this connector. And I want to make sure that these are loose. Take a good look at this, how this works. You'll see on the inside there is like a little sort of a nickel-plated plate in there that moves in and out when you tighten the screw. So you want that plate to be toward the center of the connector when you're putting the wire in, so that the wire gets between the plate and the copper piece up on the top here. So do that for all of these. So all of these are properly set up now for me to insert wires. So these terminals are color-coded. Silver is always the white connection. Green is, of course, earth ground or safety ground. And then the black connection goes for the black wire. So I'm going to start with my green safety because it's going to be the easiest one to get in. There's my ground, my white, and my black. And now you want to hold these together as tightly as possible so these wires don't back out. You can start tightening them in any order you want. Now once you've got them tight, go around them again, making sure that they are very snug. Okay, I'm going to go one more time. And there we go. Okay, that's enough. Good and tight. All three wires are in place. There is no copper showing outside of these areas here, outside of this insulated circle area here. And notice that the insulation goes in almost all the way up to the connector. There's only about 3/8 of an inch clearance there. So now what you can do is bring the back shell up. Now if you'll notice, the back shell has a little tab right here, and this connector has a detent in it. You want those two to line up. Just like that. Don't worry about getting everything to line up perfectly. You can let the screws do the rest of the work. So then we put the screws in. Start tightening those down. I'm going to set my driver on 15. Okay, then once I've done it with the power tool, I like to go around with a handheld screwdriver. Don't get this humongously tight. You don't want these to strip out. Just get these snug so that the connector shells, these two parts, are fully seated. There's a little bit of blood. I must have poked myself with that wire. So, all right, so that's that. Now, before we can put the back shell in place, we also need to make sure now that this retainer clamp is tight. So we're going to tighten these screws here. Tighten them equally. Alternate between these screws so that you get a balanced retention. There we go. That will clamp the back of this cable in place. Now we're ready to install the weatherproof cap. The problem I had, now I have never really worked with these before. I've worked with these before, but never with these insulating boots. What I've found is it's hard to get this boot over this hump. We're going to see if I can do it with the Dawn dishwashing liquid trick. So I'm going to take a good dab of this stuff. Put it all over in there like that. I'm going to wipe this stuff off on my pants. And now I'm going to pull this little ring back a little bit. You know, and this ring almost looks like it should go on afterwards, maybe. I don't know. This ring always gives me trouble here. We're going to see what happens, though. Here we go. We are in. Whew. That was interesting. Hope the camera didn't move around a whole lot on that. So now this is all set to go, folks. This is a completed project right here. This ring is threaded. This allows me to connect my connector and then lock it in place and seal it. Nice weather seal here. So I'm going to call that done. Well, folks, there you have it. There's another video on this T-10 day and counting episode, if you will. This is T-10 out of T-47 series of videos that I promised to do 37 days ago. Folks, it's wearing me out. I'm dreaming. I'm having nightmares. I dream of cameras in my face. I dream of lights blaring in my eyes. I'm dreaming of makeup artists combing my hair, brushing my hair, putting makeup on. I'm dreaming of people yelling at me saying, get over there, go over there, stand there, smile, don't smile, look that way, look this way, look up, look down. I mean, it's all over the place, folks. It's a nightmare. But I'm keeping up, huh? So, all right, that's the end. That's really the end, folks. I'm just gonna, before I lose my mind completely, I'm gonna say goodbye to you. Stay kind. And I'm so serious about that. You folks are the greatest. Stay kind out there. Stay loving. Show this world what you have to offer. I'll see you on T-9 days. Over and out. I see green screens. I see comments galore. Well, I see comments. Another video on this T-10 days and counting from this forget what I'm going to say all the time.